Okay, so last time I read from Bret Baier's book, the last video, and in this one I'm going to read a little bit from The Problem with Lincoln by Thomas J. DiLorenzo. If you've been following me, you know that what I claim, what I believe, is that the federal government has a constitution that's the Constitution of the United States for the United States of America, and it's the government for the military. It creates and gives power to the government only over the military and the federal lands. So I'm going to read a little bit out of DiLorenzo's book, starting on page 23. Lincoln was the most nationalistic of all presidents, a political heir of the Hamiltonian tradition who flatly repudiated the Jeffersonian view of the American Union in his first inaugural address when he announced to the world that no state can lawfully get out of the Union and that acts against the authority of the United States are insurrectionary or revolutionary. In the same speech, he used the words invasion and bloodshed to describe what would happen to the citizens of any state that seceded and ceased paying federal taxes, as we shall discuss in more detail shortly. Okay, so in the very first oaths that the military took, they said something to the effect that, or took an oath to the effect that they were loyal to the United States of America, but in service to the United States. Two different forms of government. The United States of America are the states and their Confederate Union, and the United States is the military and its military union or stratocracy. It's union as a stratocracy. A stratocracy is a military government. Okay, so Lincoln wanted to make the military the governing government over the states instead of the states governing the military. Okay, so that was Lincoln's view on the United States being a national government. It's a military government, which is basically what we have now. That thanks to Lincoln and Hamilton and some others. So he continues, far from believing that acts against authority of the federal government in Washington are insurrectionary and revolutionary, Jefferson had declared in Section 1 of his famous Kentucky Resolution of 1798, in response to the Sedition Act, resolved that the several states composing the United States of America, okay, that's the Confederate States that make up the United States of America, are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to their general government. So they're not in submission to the Confederacy. Okay, by compact under the style and title of the Constitution for the United States and of the amendments thereto. So the states are not under the military, the federal government, the United States, or its constitution. That constitution was created as the governing document that the states agreed to for the federal government, the military, making laws for the military. So the upper military, the congressional, the military Congress, the one in the Constitution, is to make the laws for the federal lands, the troops, the commissioned officers. Okay, so he says by compact under the style and title of a Constitution for the United States and of the amendments thereto, they constituted a general government for special purposes, military, delegated to that government certain definite powers, reserving each state to itself the residuary mass of right to their own self-government. So we, if we're not in the military, we are under the state, the state republics. We are state citizens. We are civilians because we're not in the military. Now, if you're in the military, you have to abide by the federal laws and the state laws, right, to their own self-government, and that whensoever the general government assumes delegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. So when the federal government tries to make laws for the states, and the people of the states, they're void. So federal taxes, you could say, are void because we're not federal people. Okay, so now continuing on page 30. This is Lincoln and his Civil War, and how he's tried to make the military government the government over the states, instead of the states the government over the military. So think about that one. The new Confederate government had offered to pay, this is a Civil War now, had offered to pay for any federal property in the South. And that's because the federal government, to put its military posts inside the states, had to buy property. The states had to agree to sell the property. The military Congress had to agree that it wanted that property. It doesn't want just any old piece of land that is not strategically located for military purposes, for the purposes which the military was created, which is defense. You know, it needs to be strategically located in the state. So the state would say, here's a piece of land, and the federal military would say, yeah, that's a good piece of land, we'll take it, we'll buy it. Or the military government, the military Congress will say, well, we don't really need that piece of property. How about something maybe over in this area? Okay, so now during the Civil War, the new Confederate government, which I don't know for sure why he calls it new Confederate government, because you had to have a confederacy before you can have a military to defend the Confederacy, because the military doesn't exactly defend each state, they defend all the states equally. That's why in their first oath, the very first oaths after the Constitution was signed, they took an oath of loyalty to all the states, the United States of America, and they took a specific oath of service to be in service to the United States, the military. Lincoln flatly rejected any such discussion. Then he promised invasion, force, bloodshed, and violence. So he's going to use the military to take over the states violently if he has to, and he did. If any state interfered with this simple duty of tax collection, gone forever was Jefferson's notion that if there were a separation, the different confederacies would all be our children, whom we would wish well, whether they were in or out of the Union. The myth of the sacred Union, bound together by the mystic cords of memory, was invented to provide cover for Lincoln's cold-hearted willingness to wage total war on his own country for tax revenue. The majority of Americans must have been mystified by such rhetoric, having always thought of the Union as nothing more than a practical political arrangement and a division of labor within governmental units. Essentially, Lincoln was replacing "In God We Trust" with "Pay Up or Die" as the new model for the U.S. government. There was no talk of force of any kind when the subject was slavery, except for forcing runaway slaves back into slavery by enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act. Tax collection, on the other hand, called forth threats of total war on the entire population of the South. Threats that were carried out a few months later, leading to as many as 750,000 American deaths, far more than in any other American wars combined, even to this day. So, The Problem with Lincoln, Thomas J. DiLorenzo. I think I got this book off of Amazon. Really good book. Lots of really heart-wrenching stuff he talks about that Lincoln did in the Civil War. I encourage you all to read it. Continue watching my videos. Like, share, subscribe, and I bid you farewell until next time.